Minister, you'll be aware that on the 7th of November just gone, there were elections in Nicaragua. They were elections for the office of President and elections to the National Assembly. The official result records that Daniel Ortega and the Sandinista Front won 76% of the vote with a turnout of 65%. No independent journalistic or public policy analysis believes those results. Can you tell us what's your assessment of the result?
Thanks, Deputy. I know you've raised this issue before the elections took place, and I don't think the results are surprising. Ireland and the EU stated on numerous occasions that the elections which took place in Nicaragua on the 7th of November last were going to be neither free nor fair, and that has unfortunately been the case. No credible opposition figures were allowed to run, and no election monitoring was permitted. We've witnessed in recent months a severe crackdown on journalists, opposition politicians, human rights activists, civil society and business leaders in Nicaragua. This repression has deprived Nicaraguan citizens of their human, civil and political rights and of the right to elect their own government in fair and transparent elections. Ireland and the EU have unequivocally condemned the actions of the government and repeatedly called for the immediate and unconditional release of all opposition politicians and all other political prisoners. We have called for the authorities to allow the return of international human rights bodies and NGOs to the country. We must continue to put pressure on the Nicaraguan authorities to put an end to the crackdown and to restore full respect for human rights and democracy in the country. The current situation is deplorable. Just like multiple other countries and multilateral bodies, the EU released a very strong statement on the 8th of November condemning the elections and stating that the presidency of Daniel Ortega lacks democratic legitimacy. The Nicaraguan government was left in no doubt that its actions are unacceptable to all EU member states, including Ireland. That statement also noted that the EU will consider further restrictive measures against the regime. The next steps in terms of EU action on Nicaragua, if the authorities do not reverse the crackdown, are currently being discussed among EU member states in Brussels. The EU and Ireland have also been very clear that any further action must not add to the hardship of the population, and that the most vulnerable sectors of society must continue to be supported. So my department will continue to closely engage at EU and international level through our embassy in Mexico, which covers relations with Nicaragua and with partners on the ground, including NGOs and civil society organisations.
Thank you, Minister. Thanks, Minister. I suppose those of us who aren't in Nicaragua are dependent upon receiving independent reports as to what happened. I think it's important that we consider those independent reports. Human Rights Watch, the American division, recorded that the election results were a sham. The Organisation for American States said that the elections were neither fair nor free nor transparent. And obviously other countries around the world that have respect democratic institutions have regarded the elections as being unfair and in effect corrupt. I suppose in order to appreciate this, we have to have a look back at what's happened in Nicaragua, particularly since 2007, when President Ortega returned to power. As we all know, he was part of a revolutionary movement in the 70s and 80s that indeed had much support in this country, but something strange seems to have happened to him since he got back into power in 2007, 2008. In effect, he has turned Nicaragua into a police state. If you look at what happened last June, there were 5 opposition leaders who were imprisoned for breaches of alleged public order, and then in July others went into exile because of threats. So, Minister, what specifically do you think the EU will do? Are we looking at further sanctions in the same way as the Americans have done?
Minister.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in short, I think the EU is trying to consider how it should respond and how that response can be impactful in relation to the regime, but not further impoverish people of Nicaragua. So I think that this is something that the EU is likely to come back to. My understanding is that his inauguration is due to be in January. I don't expect that the EU will be invited to that. And if they are, I'm not sure they'd attend anyway at ambassadorial level. But I do think that that the European Commission is looking at options for member states to consider in terms of how we can apply appropriate pressure, recognising the change that has taken place in an extraordinary way over the last number of years in Nicaragua.
Thanks, Minister. I think it is important that the EU has a strong voice in this, because obviously people who are supportive of the Ortega regime will seek to present it as though this is merely Americans and supporters of the United States who are criticising the revolutionary movement of Daniel Ortega. And that can have regional spread in South America. You can see from the people who have congratulated him that it's the president of Venezuela, and people who seek to purport that there is a regime attack on them from the United States of America. So I think the voice of the European Union is extremely important. When you look at what the United States done, it has imposed sanctions upon individuals who are very much associated with the Ortega regime. I think the European Union needs to do the same in respect of that. I also think we need to provide some independent reportage from the European Union as to why we say the elections were unfair, because just uttering that the elections were unfair doesn't convince all people. We need the evidence to show that that was the case, and I think that's something that the European Union has the resources to complete.
Yeah, well, I mean, the fact that that election observers weren't allowed to observe the elections makes that a little bit more difficult. But I think the evidence of credible candidates that were detained and weren't allowed to participate in the elections is pretty strong evidence in itself. I do agree with you that there is a tendency to paint this as something that the US is taking a stand on, and so the absence of other international actors expressing concern, I think, feeds into that politics. But I mean, just for what it's worth, the comments that I've heard from Joseph Borrell and from other EU leaders on this issue have been pretty strong. And the EU statements also have been very strong before the elections and after them. So I think it's been consistent. So I think the concern that you've outlined is something that the EU is very well aware of.
Thank you.